Mboweni has unveiled plans to freeze public sector wage increases for the next 3 years. He believes this will help salvage the economy and the country's ballooning debt and fiscal deficit.
We need to come together to forge a new consensus on the public sector employee compensation. We need a strategic conversation, one which takes into account the needs of the country as a whole. Our compatriots in the private sector have already made sacrifices and even negotiated salary reductions to keep the businesses afloat. Over the past 5 years, public sector employee compensation grew by 7.2% a year on average, well above inflation. Over the next 5 years, it will need to grow much, much lower. The Minister of the Department of Public Service and Administration and the leadership of the public service unions are meeting to discuss how best to adapt to this new reality. That we have to do more with less, and that we're in this together. I must stress, however, that our public servants do very important work for our country. They are patriots. They too wish to unburden our country of debt. They want to bequeath assets and not liabilities to the next generation. Still, we cannot expect our civil service to carry the burden of nation building alone.
Now, this freeze is undoubtedly likely to have negative implications for relations between Labour and the state. It will also likely have an impact on the tripartite alliance. For more on this, we are joined by SACP's First Deputy General Secretary, Mapaila, as well as Saftu's General Secretary, Zwelinzima Vavi. Gentlemen, good evening and thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
I'm sure the headlines are already saying another bailout for SAA, 10.5 billion rands, which is going to be a big headline. But, of course, the other issues that are coming out of this midterm budget policy speech is this proposed wage freeze for public sector servants. But not only the civil servants, across the board, it seems, MPs, ministers, top management at SOEs, and generally across the board for everyone to go through this wage freeze. Is this something that is going to set the minister, generally the Cyril Ramaphosa administration, on a collision course with Labour?
Yeah, most certainly. I think this is unacceptable to start with the wage freeze for public servants because it's lack of understanding of economy, and particularly economy in a developing country, because the wages of the public sector workers goes a long way in intervening in the rebuilding and consolidation of our economy. And the manner in which it is done, it's top-down, unacceptable, without appropriate negotiations after the betrayal of the wage agreement with workers. But further than that, one can say that this budget policy statement has brought us back to the crisis before the COVID-19 crisis of our economy. So it's quite clear government has no ideas on how to move out of this economy. And we've put suggestions on the table, and I think that the minister basically attacked those ideas on the basis that South Africans, there are those that we can agree or not agree.
Yeah, this is well the proposals so that we look at, and there are some that we
that's unacceptable behavior, particularly given the responsibility he has and the period we are in our economy. So we think that it still follows a neoliberal framework and trajectory, which is not helpful for any developing country. Even so-called developed countries, they are making interventions that are much, much better than what we have seen in this budget policy statement.
How much trouble are we in here?
Well, the workers are in trouble. The working class as a whole is in trouble under the leadership who refuses to move from another planet to the planet where workers are living. And in that planet, there is a wage bill problem. In the other planet, there is a chronic staff shortages in the hospitals, in our police stations, in our correctional services, and the schools are dysfunctional. The teachers' numbers are declining. The numbers of students to pupils are forever increasing. In that other divide of this other planet where they are coming from, there is a crisis of a deficit to the GDP in this other planet. We're looking at the rest of the world in terms of how the ratio of the GDP is, and we see nothing to worry about because we sort of compare very easily with our peers in the world. Yeah. So that's what we're dealing with here. There's a class divide in society, and undoubtedly the ANC government as a whole speaks for the other class, inspired by what the IMF, World Bank and the rating agencies are saying should be the solutions to the crisis facing humankind. And on the other class divide is the workers who are going to face a wage freeze of 4 years. A wage freeze of 4 years is the worst attack because it sets the industrial relations pre-1979, pre-Vienna Commission, where it was just basically no collective bargaining system. Every employer have a right to sign something today, 10 against tomorrow.
Is Labour deaf to this warning, though? Listen to this warning, because it seems to be the real thing that the minister is worried about here.
You can't say when you are facing a debt to GDP ratio of 95%, you say you continue in the same way you have been doing things. You're going to have a fiscal crisis, and I'm warning you, you're going to, I'm using Bishop Tutu's words, Archbishop Tutu's words, I'm warning you. If you continue in this direction, you are headed for a sovereign debt crisis. I'm warning you.
Is that not as clear as daylight, that warning that you're not hearing?
No, not at all. It's a typical strategy to scaremonger and to use, again, IMF World Bank standards and impose them. Elsewhere in the world, countries of similar economic size with us have exactly the same debt ratio to the GDP, if not worse than us. Compare us with Brazil, with Argentina, with Mexico, with Asian countries. Yeah. You will not be scared, but if you live in the world of the minister, then sky is falling.
If you're telling me you're paying 2.1 billion rand a day to service debt, right? When you're looking at the percentage in terms of revenue, it's quite low. It's lower than it was during the crisis in 2008. So there is no revenue that is coming in, right? But you're telling us we must raise that borrowing to the levels of 95%.
Actually, what he said is irritating, because the plans that have been put on the table, that have been ignored, does talk to sources of resources for the country. If you like, if you go to countries like Germany, for instance, the biggest economy in Europe, it has no less than 1,400 public banks that generate money. Money is generated in the economy primarily in the banking sector, let alone the industry and so forth, where they don't even want to go into that space. They can't even recapitalize public banking institutions. That is why, with this framework of budget processes, you will never be able to come out of the problem. That's why they will always create these scaremongering ideas so that we go back and say there's nothing that can be done. There's absolutely much that can be done. And I think I agree with Comrade Vavi in terms of comparison with other countries. We are actually far better off. In any case, we're a big industrial economy, the biggest on the African continent. So it can't just be we beat our chest about that when it comes to those aggregate figures, but actually fail to deal with the nitty-gritties of making this economy function. To start with, let them release resources for public banking sector, for instance, for municipalities, for different departments. And by the way, the lending ratio of those banks will be the primary source of the major income that this country can.
I want to talk more about those measures that will bring in income into the country. Is a sense, gentlemen, that says private sector, I mean, those are the words of the minister, have come on board. In fact, some of them have taken wage cuts of close to 30%. We need to come on board as well in the public sector. In fact, also the rest of society, we're going to be taxed a little bit more in 2021. And everybody must play their part here. It seems you're the only ones who are not playing ball.
No, he's pulling wool on our eyes, literally. Where is the private sector coming in? Where have you seen any of the CEOs earning 2017 110 million rands every year, taking a 30% wage cut? Where have that happened? Where is this public sector?
Well,
private sector?
there are many companies who have really cut salaries because of COVID-19.
No CEO I know in this country have cut any salary or imposed a wage freeze on their benefits. It's not true. Secondly, the private sector is hoarding almost 2 trillion rands. They are sitting with it in their back pockets. They won't invest it. You know why? Because the monetary policies of the government allows them, through a very high interest rate regime in pursuance of a low inflation, to put their money in the banks and get between 3 and 4% incentive for just lying next to the pool. They're making 3 to 4% in profit. Where have they come in? There is an investment strike in this economy. There is a public sector investment strike, because government have combined not just neoliberalism, but have also imposed an austerity program. They're cutting the expenditure left, right, and center.
Not only that, we couldn't even raise 10 billion rands. We had to literally borrow from other departments. I mean, there's a cut that GCI,
the whole noise about
10 billion rands.
The whole noise only about 500 billion rands is a farce. This government have only put on the table, in terms of the new money, a real stimulus package, a 36 billion rands. The rest of that 500 billion rands is money that have been cut elsewhere in the public service. Yes. For example, if you talk about the wage freeze, the real reason why that is possible is because the government have cut 161 billion rands of the wages of public sector workers, so that it can put on the side some money to say to the people who do not follow the details, look, we have a 500 billion rands, it's 10% of your GDP, when in real fact they put aside 36 billion rands, a 3.4% of the GDP. This is a typical example of robbing Pumeza to pay Nziki.
Absolutely. That's exactly what is happening.
That's exactly what is happening. But we are being told that there's a massive intervention. Look at the
Let's talk about this about massive interventions. They say 12.6 billion rand game changer initiative by President Cyril Ramaphosa to create jobs. Those are the words that I used in this particular speech, which, I mean, in essence, is the building of hospitals, maybe a building of some infrastructure. That's in essence what it's going to be, and fighting fire. As well as some public school employees that are going to get in there. I mean, that's where the 12.6 billion is going to go.
Yeah, that one we welcome. It's too little for public infrastructure programs. I think we needed to allocate much more money into that sector, because that's where you're going to create a lot of jobs. In any case, this point that Comrade Vavi is raising, the 200 billion that we were speaking about, only less than 20 billion has been spent.
Yeah,
16. So, and you're counting Parliament as if the whole of 500,000 is committed.
No, I mean, to his credit, he did say that Reserve Bank and SARS and everybody else collectively coming up with a strategy for the uptake, because it has been poor.
Why have that kind? Why play with money in that form and then attack workers on the one hand? So it shows lack of commitment, lack of respect. But we welcome interventions on infrastructure development, whether it's in housing, the support for the poor, the intervention on SAA, despite that we had to fight hard for SAA almost when the institution has almost collapsed. Yeah. Actually, that's...
Is it too late? You saying
no, it's not.
I mean, there's a
business
rescue plan that has been sitting there.
It's not too late. It's not too late.
It was already late, because it was supposed to have come before the pandemic. They allowed it to go this far.
They allowed it to collapse almost absolutely. But at least it can still be rescuable to an extent that this intervention, we welcome it. But we could have done better. In fact, we need a better aviation strategy as a country, and SAA could play such a dominant role in that regard. Instead, they want to give that aviation strategy to big capital, which has failed. Big capital never accounts to any single government or individuals. I mean, it's amazing, a government led by those who fought in the liberation struggle, who believe that they can win election through interventions of big capital. It shocks, it boggles the mind. It will never happen. So we have to insist on getting the right things, come out of the crisis before COVID-19 crisis, because we're already in a major capitalist crisis. The crisis we have in this country is the crisis of the system of capitalism, and the government pursuing that system that is not saving our people.
I want to talk to you while you're still there. Government going ahead with the process of reviewing Regulation 28 to make it easier for retirement funds to increase investment in infrastructure. However, this should be done through a board of trustees. In other words, the board of trustees should then determine where they're going to invest. It's that argument that has been going on now.
Yeah, it's nonsensical because it doesn't respect the fact that the government can impose prescribed assets. Of course, proper management of those funds. That is why even in the prescribed assets, we have what we call defined funds. So the prescribed industry or the asset management industry continues to laugh all the way to the bank, making a lot of money out of South Africa's workers. Currently, there's more than 12 trillion rands, and with the performance of the rand, we're possibly back to about 15 trillion rands of that money available. That money has been invested all over the world, creating jobs in other countries, developing other countries, just so that they can make some profit, when actually this country is going down, it's been underdeveloped. I mean, that's one major issue. But that regulation is going to be watered down because it's not in the full control of the state and the asset management industry in the manner that it's been engaged. Government has got a distant approach to it. Basically, it leaves it to their determination. They will never be able to invest in rural areas, build roads or any other thing, infrastructure in the rural areas. But there's enough money there that actually properly reinforced, properly discussed with workers of this country who could be able to develop our country proper. With the resources that
Regulation 28, what's your view? What's your take on board of trustees being the ones who decide what happens to those monies?
Look, in Saftu, we're still debating this issue. It's a very sensitive issue, this issue. There is a belief in too many of our members that we cannot be reckless with their retirement and pension funds. Yeah. The call out there is, please don't line our pensions and provident in the feeding trough. They have seen enough in terms of what have come out of the PIC, and they are absolutely nervous that the same thing will happen to their provident funds and their pension funds. So we're still debating. But the historic call of the progressive forces here before 1994 was that we must maintain the apartheid-era prescribed investment. The apartheid regime was prescribing investment at 10%, and that's how they managed to build all of the infrastructure we are destroying and or benefiting from. It was workers' pensions and provident funds. There was corruption even at that moment, but people are just nervous now. So even the most progressive policy proposals suddenly are coming up to be questioned as to whether they will serve the purpose. So we want to continue to doing the research. For example, if you were to counterpose amending or insisting on only using Regulation 28, meaning that you're going to say to the Board of Trustees, please invest in the non-listed companies this amount of your portfolio so that you can build infrastructure where workers live, instead of putting every money into the glass buildings of Sandton. Versus the prescription. The prescription says, thou shalt put money in the infrastructure in Alexander or in Soweto or in other black working class residential areas. We've got to continue that discussion. It's a progressive proposition, we're saying, but it is now counteracted by the fear amongst members of Saftu to say, hold on. Have you seen what happened to the PIC money? Are you not seeing the scale of corruption in COVID, in the PPEs and all of that? Yeah, it goes back to the whole thing. We all should be supporting a more developmental, active state that can nationalize the mines and put it under the democratic control of workers. But again, every time you raise that issue, some voice will say, have you not seen?
Let's talk about that issue of nationalizing and the fact that, well, it's only SAA because of the pressure that was happening within the party and the politics eventually winning, and Treasury saying, okay, we'll go and find money in some other departments to cut their baseline and fund this thing so that the business rescue practitioners do whatever they need to do. But no other SOEs getting money at this particular point. We don't know in 2021's budget.
There's some money that went to the development bank.
To the land bank. To the land bank. Get another
4.3 billion or something, which we welcome. We hear that the land bank is in absolute crisis. But unfortunately, the government have mismanaged every state-owned enterprises. Every one of them is in a crisis. The only one that I think that is still breathing normally is the IDC. Everything else, SABC, Petro SA, DBSA, the arms manufacturing institution, SAA, all of them are all collapsing, which is an indictment on government, because this is what I normally say. When you inherit these things from a racist apartheid regime that have created this thing in order to solve the wide poverty crisis, you inherit them. You inherit SAA that was rated as the #1 airliner in the world in many years, successively. You do the same thing to Eskom, that was once the most important energy utility in the whole world, providing the cheapest electricity. Then suddenly, in 26 years of your black government, all of them are knocking in the door of the Treasury year in, year out because of your deployment strategy, because you put your worst cadres to run them with who have no skills, who have no qualification, nothing, except that they can know how to lift the knee up and toe. Outside that, nothing. You then end up with this. Then you feed the root of racism. Because all of these whites can say, you see, they inherited Telkom, and where's Telkom today? Where's SAA? Where's all of them? That's the first problem. The second point is that you rob yourself of instruments that you should be using to now solve the black problem of poverty and inequality and unemployment. It's very sad, the whole state of affairs in terms of what have happened. But we agree with SACP that 10.5 billion rands have to be given to SAA, or else we're going to kiss goodbye, basically, to an airliner that South Africa needs.
Well, look, gentlemen, we can never exhaust these matters, but let me thank you very much for coming through today and sharing those views with us here on the Newsfeed Late Night. Well, that was the SACP First Deputy General Secretary, Mapaila, as well as Saftu's General Secretary, Zwelinzima Vavi.